Visiting Russia nowadays is much more complicated than it was before 2022, and there are certainly a number of things you should know before coming here. In this video, I'm going to give you 9 really important tips to make sure your stay here is as easy as it can be. Tip number 1, download the app Yandex.Go before arriving in Russia. Yandex.Go is really the everything app in Russia. You can use it to order food from restaurants, to get groceries delivered, even book those electric scooters that are absolutely everywhere, all over the streets of the city. But more importantly, for you as a foreigner, it's the best taxi app in Russia. If you're arriving in Moscow at one of the main 3 airports, or perhaps at Pulkovo Airport in St. Petersburg, you'll most likely want to take a taxi to your hotel or place of accommodation from the airport. The airports are all quite far from the centre, and it can be quite a long trek to get from there to the place you're staying if you take public transport. Yes, the airports do have trains that take you into the centre, and one of the airports now has a metro station. It's on a metro line that will take you directly to the centre. But if you've got quite a lot of luggage, it can be a big hassle to then get a train, then change to the bus or change to the metro, and then walk to your accommodation. So I highly recommend taking a taxi from the airport to where you're staying, and that is definitely best done with the Yandex.Go app. It'll take you about an hour from either of the airports into the centre. It'll cost you somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 rubles. That's like $15. I mean, for the price, it really is worth it. And it cuts out so much of that public transport hassle. So tip number 1, download Yandex.Go. Tip number 2, bring cash. Given the situation with sanctions, it's likely that your bank cards will simply not work in Russia. Russia is an almost cashless society nowadays, but for visitors, it's completely different. If you don't bring any money, you won't be able to pay for anything. So make sure you bring plenty for your trip. Bring more than enough, because you never know just how much you might need. Number 3, be prepared for delays at the airport. Passport control can be a nightmare nowadays. Westerners are often stopped and interrogated on their way in, especially if you've got no Russian stamps in your passport already. So there's a good shot it'll take you a few hours to cross into the country. Be mindful of that when you're planning travel from the airport into the centre, especially if someone is actually coming to meet you to pick you up. One small tip, if possible, when looking at flights into Moscow, try and choose a flight that doesn't arrive immediately after a flight from Central Asia. Since the terrible attack on Crocus City Hall earlier this year, the authorities have been quite discriminatory towards Central Asian travellers, meaning they get quite extensive checks. So if you're in a queue behind lots of people from Central Asia, there's a good chance your wait at the airport will be even longer. That's just a fact of life here in Moscow in 2024. And it's a tip maybe you'll want to use. Number 4, although the English level is quite poor here, don't be afraid to ask for help. Many people are very willing to help strangers. So while it's true that the average Russian doesn't have the best level of English, people will often try and help you if they can. And luckily, many words in Russian and English are pretty similar. So if you stick to simple vocabulary, they'll either know it from their English lessons back in school, or they'll be able to guess because it's similar to a Russian word. For example, if you want to know where the nearest metro station is, don't say something like, "Excuse me, sir, could you please tell me how to get to the nearest metro station?" Instead, just smile, say the word metro, or even if you're feeling a little bit more confident, put on a Russian accent, metro. Look kind, look polite, and you'll be helped. It's the same for many other words. For example, toilet. If you said to someone, toilet, they're gonna know what you mean. And of course, be polite yourself, and to smile and say spasiba at the end. Number 5, don't be afraid to use public transport. Public transport in Russia's biggest cities is second to none, especially in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's very easy to use, and it will get you anywhere you realistically will visit in the city in no time and for very minimal expense. I know Americans in particular are allergic to public transport, but it's really excellent here and it'll save you a ton of money. If you actually come with cash, I recommend getting one of the transport cards that each city sells. In Moscow, it's called a troika. Putting money on that is simple. You just use the machines in the metro stations, and then you can easily use it as a contactless card for all your rides. When you get to the barrier, just put it on, nice and easy. If somehow you've got a Russian bank card from a Russian bank account, then there's actually no reason to even bother getting one of those Moscow cards, a troika for example. You tap your bank card every time, like you can do in London, no problem, and it'll take the money directly from your account. It's super user friendly and I highly recommend it. Definitely get on the public transport here. Number 6, don't worry about cultural faux pas. When people travel abroad, they're often scared that they'll do something that is normal in their country, but it's not normal in the culture that they're visiting. One of the obvious examples of this is tipping. In some countries like the US, it's basically mandatory, whereas in other countries like Japan, for example, it can be seen as very awkward or even as an insult. In Russia, you don't really have to worry about anything like that. Everyone here is much more chilled about that kind of thing, and furthermore, they're also very, very exposed to Western culture, Western society. So there's nothing you're really going to do that is going to be such a big shock to them that they'll find weird or insulting. And if we talk about tipping in particular, yeah, people do tip here, but it's not mandatory. People don't feel awkward or strange if you don't give a tip. It's not insulting. A tip here is sort of like in the UK, it's generally seen as a thank you for excellent service. So what I would say is, if you come to Russia, don't worry about breaking any cultural rules. It's very hard to do it, especially if you're from the West. You're not going to insult someone accidentally, so you can lift that worry off your shoulders and come here feeling a little bit more relaxed. Number 7, dress for the weather. In the UK, we rarely get extreme temperatures, but in Moscow, it can be plus 40 degrees in the summer and minus 40 degrees in the winter. So it's super important to consider the month you're visiting when you're packing your suitcase, especially if you have this misconception that Russia is a cold country. If you watch Hollywood movies, you'd probably think it's snowing here constantly. But today, look, it's late August and it's 28 degrees. I wouldn't want to be walking around today in winter clothes. It would be sweltering. As said, Russia, of course, has its own clothes stores. So if you arrive here and you're surprised by the weather, then of course you'll be able to go shopping and buy some clothes once you're in the country. But you might be a little bit cold for a couple of days if you arrive here, for example, in October, and you've got t-shirts and shorts when the thermometer is close to 0. So tip number 7, think about the temperature before you come and pack correctly. Tip number 8, get a SIM card. This is really important. At some point after your arrival, you will need to get a Russian SIM. You could get it in the airport, but the phone networks have shops absolutely everywhere in every city, so it shouldn't be a problem if you wait until after you've got to your hotel. So the obvious reason for this is financial. You can get very generous internet packages here for fairly cheap. This is even more relevant today in 2024 because the roaming charges for Western SIMs in Russia nowadays are insane. You could spend hundreds of dollars over a week. Instead, get a basically unlimited package here in Moscow for super cheap. And it's not a contract either, so if you don't add any more money into your account after that first month, then once you leave, you can't possibly be charged. But there's another reason as well for getting a Russian SIM, and that's that almost every service here in this country asks you for a confirmation text message before you can use it. That's ordering food, booking a taxi, even to log in on the Wi-Fi at a restaurant or a shopping center, you'll need to get a text message confirmation. So if you get a SIM, you'll save both money and you'll save time, and you'll be able to use all these Russian services that require a text. So I highly recommend it. Do it on day 1 or day 2 if possible. Number 9, speak to people and make friends for life. Everyone knows the stereotype that Russians are cold and unfriendly, but that's simply not true. They especially love foreigners who come to visit the country to experience what it has to offer. So speak to as many people as you can. Each interaction with a new person will exponentially improve your experience here. Even if it's through very limited English, but I guarantee you're also going to meet people who speak perfectly fluent English and are going to love to make a native speaking friend. If you're shy, just go to the smoking area of a pub or a bar or a nightclub and speak English really loud. And then you look around and you'll be surrounded by people wanting to become your new friend, wanting to meet the foreigner. And it'll really, really improve your time here. There's absolutely nothing to lose. I highly recommend be super social. It's a great idea. Okay, so that's the end of this video. You've seen me walk a bit through Gorky Park and cross the river, and I'm now outside the Christ the Savior Cathedral here in central Moscow. So if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel. And if you have any other tips that I've missed, I'm sure there are hundreds I could have come up with. I'd really appreciate it if you could write them down in the comments, and maybe I'll make a future video with all your tips. So that's my top 9. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.